Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. I'm getting back in the groove here. I've been down the COVID road. It's a funny thing. When COVID hit, I isolated myself for 2.5 years. I didn't go out. I didn't answer the front door. I did nothing. I wanted to stay completely safe and no COVID. And then circumstances happen. Somebody in my household goes out, catches COVID, and hands it over to me. It's like a handoff, football handoff, hands it over to me. And this whole little house of mine with two grandchildren, and we all wind up with COVID. But I was telling Peter, who we're going to talk to momentarily, that yesterday was my first kind of normal day. I feel like a normal human being. And it's nice, and I'm all boosted, and I think that helps. So I'm with Peter Gambino today, and Peter and I met in this wonderful world of LinkedIn, and great chemistry, and one thing led to another, a couple messages here and there, and all of a sudden we're zooming a couple of weeks ago, and great chemistry. His journey, a part of his journey was through Rutgers, and of course that intrigued me. I'm a Rutgers guy, but Peter, as a millennial, as a 20-something millennial, has had such an interesting life, and we've spent lots of time zooming. We just zoomed for an
30 minutes,
hour,
30
a half
minutes.
hour, and
Yeah.
we zoomed last week. And his journey, from jazz dancing. He's a literary critic. He's an agent, a musical journalist. He's a butcher. He's a jack of all trades. He's written some really fascinating essays, and his journey into music. And I've gotten such a kick out of chatting with Peter.
Likewise.
And yes, we've got about a half century that separates us, but we're on such a great level. The official title of this interview: Peter Gambino, executive booking agent; Lindy HopperSwing, jazz dancer, butcher, millennial, went to Baruch College, graduated in 2018. So that was my official quote monologue that Jimmy Fallon does and stuff. I'm not Jimmy Fallon. And I want to introduce Peter and thank him for being here. And I guess the best way to do a little brief bio, and then we'll jump into some aspects of your very interesting life, Peter.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Yeah, so I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in a few different neighborhoods, Bensonhurst, before all the Italians moved out. And then Marine Park. I basically went to Catholic school for like 10 years, like from like pre-K to 8th grade. I went to Good Shepherd in Marine Park. Then high school, I moved to Gerritsen Beach, which is like a 5-minute drive away from Marine Park, but still quite a different neighborhood. And I went to Brooklyn Tech, which really felt like some of the first real schooling I'd ever been to. It's where I made my first real friends. Like, I don't keep in contact with anybody from middle school at all. I know a number of people who do, but all those people from my life are gone. And I went to Tech. It wasn't a school you could normally apply to. You had to take the SHSAT. Stuyvesant is the same. Stuyvesant is the hardest one to get into via the SHSAT. And I think I just made the cutoff by like a few points, by like 6 or 8 points, something like that. Very different from Catholic school. When I went to Catholic school, I had maybe a graduating class of like 60 people or so. At Tech, my graduating class was like 1,300.
Wow.
Yeah. So like we needed to go to Barclay Center to do it, because we had one of the largest auditoriums in Brooklyn. I don't know if New York City in general, but we had one of the largest auditoriums. It was like 1,500 people, but that wasn't going to fit all the parents. So we had to do it at I think we were the first graduating class to do it at Barclays. and it was a huge school as well. There were like 8 floors that the students had access to, and there was an unofficial 9th floor as well. And I think there was even one above that, because it used to be that they hosted like a radio station all the way at the top. Like you can still see like the satellite or the radio tower. Catholic school, I mean, we had maybe 3-4 floors at most. And the thing about these floors, they were incredibly dense. It was like this sort of, all the floors were constructed as like this square with like, doors along the outer perimeter and the inner perimeter. I remember, the word that came to mind, or the words that came to mind when I first got there, were both, labyrinth and hellish. Just trying to find which room you were supposed to get into, and teachers didn't necessarily have a lot of patience for telling you where to go. I think my first day I was asking where to go, and some guy was like, just figure it out yourself. But I loved it. I made, the work was hard, also hellish in a lot of ways. I lost a lot of sleep, but I made incredible friends there that I'm still very close with to this day. And in some ways they kind of ruined me. They set such a high standard for what friendships are worth pursuing and maintaining. I don't want to say it's hard for me to make friends. It's just not that I mind. I'm fairly introverted. I'm pretty comfortable spending a lot of time alone. But they set the standards high, and in general I get bored easily. It made it hard to. It's made it hard to be friends with people my age, I suppose. I kind of grew up fast, and a lot of my friends at Tech were all like at least a year older than me too. And as I've gotten older, the gap kind of keeps getting bigger for who I get close with quickly. College, it was 2 to 3 years above me. Like when I met my friends at the dance club there, the ones who I got closest with were people who had been doing it for a few years already, were the teachers, were the organizers, or they were in grad school. And now in Charleston, my 2 best friends are Chanel Garland Leach. She's a dancer. Her and her husband Ben Leach, and they have this. I'm not a kids guy, but they do have the most beautiful 2-year-old boy I've ever met. Incredible head of hair. She's 32, and then one of my managers, Vernon Brown, he's 36. And it doesn't feel like there's any kind of distance between us as a result of our age. I've always gone along with people older than me, and I think that really started in high school. It was 4 years, but it was a very, very dense 4 years, especially the last 2, just in terms of
you talked about high school in Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn for a couple of years. I don't know if I mentioned that to you when I first got married.
Yeah.
I lived on Bedford and Kings Highway.
Yeah.
But there's this wonderful movie. I'm an old movie guy, and I think I might have mentioned this to you when we talked a couple of weeks ago. It's called Heaven Help Us, and
Yes.
it's an early 60s movie about Catholic school in Brooklyn. Kevin Dillon, Andrew McCarthy, Mary Stuart Masterson, a wonderful Donald Sutherland plays the head priest. It's a wonderful, really great character study and story about Catholic school in Brooklyn in the early 60s, when they were still playing rock music, which we talked about. So anyway, I'm giving you an assignment. Go watch it. You'll get a kick out of it. Heaven Help Us. Your college career consisted of some Rutgers,
2 years, yeah.
Penn State. If you want to just briefly talk a little bit about Rutgers, Penn State, and then Baruch, and then we'll kind of move on.
Yeah, just to clarify, I didn't go to Penn State. I went there after I graduated to
Okay,
go live with my
but you were
partner at the
there.
time. Yeah, I
Okay,
was there, but that was like post graduation.
okay,
But yeah, I started at Rutgers. My last years of high school, tech had a major system, which is I think fairly uncommon for most high schools. And I had a number of friends involved in computer science. And I never saw myself going towards STEM, and in a lot of ways I probably would have been much better served going into one of the social science majors. But I went into computer science. And I did well enough at it and liked it well enough that I thought this was worth pursuing in college, if not because I was exceptional and loved the work, which is what I think people should do. You should find something that you are exceptional and you love. But I saw it as a means of finding enough financial stability, career stability, that I would be able to afford the things I really loved, like music. That was at the time. Like I want enough money that I don't have to worry about how much money I'm going to spend on concert tickets or buying new equipment, traveling, etc. So I saw it as a fairly reasonable means to a more creative end. And so yeah, I went to Rutgers, New Brunswick. I think they gave me a bit of a scholarship, and I lived in Best Hall, which was like one of their new dormitories for like the engineers. And I even passed the AP at the end of my senior year, but I ended up taking the 101 computer science course just because it just seemed like something I could use more practice in, and why not learn this in a more college professional setting. And I remember my first day, and I think this can apply to a lot of things outside of computer science, but I remember my professor, I wish I could remember his name, saying that there are two rules in software development. And the first rule is users are idiots. And the second rule is you are a user. um, so that stuck with me, even if some of the more technical stuff hasn't necessarily. Um, and by the end of the first year, I was already getting, I was already kind of falling out of it. The first semester went really well. I enjoyed the course. And then second semester, we went into data structures, and I had to take Calc 2. And I've never been inclined to enjoy math, never was good at it. I really hated it, honestly, especially in college. I had good professors. I just hated the work, and it just endlessly frustrated me, gave me a lot of anxiety. I had a panic attack just thinking about the work I was going to have to do to get ready for my final that second semester. But I that's when I was really starting to have a depressive episode that I had some kind of self-awareness of, but not quite yet. And then my second year, I couldn't even get into the computer science classes because they were just so booked. The only one I could get into was linear algebra, right? And so now I have to do this semester. Like I'm still interested in project-based like computer science work, but now I'm stuck doing my least favorite work within this field. That's the only thing I can do, linear algebra. And I just remember I was in class one day, linear algebra, and I was looking for other courses to take, and I saw this musical journalism course being offered, and it was at the same time as a linear algebra course. And I remember just signing up and just walking out of the class, just like I'm done. Like I'm not, going to declare that I'm out. I'm not going to keep trying this or ask my professor for permission. I'm done, with computer science. And yeah, I was also taking this intro to world music class at the time with this guy, Professor Hernandez. And I had a number of conversations with him outside of class, and he would occasionally mention ethnomusicology, which is sort of the study of music, not just upon culture, but music as culture. And talking a lot about the participant performance spectrum, like Western music, very much along the performance spectrum, right? There's a very clear divide between audience and the performer, right? Like the audience is not, they're not part of the music, they're just bearing witness to it. But as you get into Eastern and African cultures, it's much more participatory. Everybody sings, everybody dances, everybody plays an instrument, regardless of whether you're good at it or not. And some people have higher status than others, obviously, but it's just expected that you will be a part of this, and you are a participant yourself. Lindy Hop kind of straddles the line in a lot of ways, and the relationship can be very dynamic.
So
Um,
you're at Rutgers,
yeah.
and you just mentioned Lindy Hop. Um, you were introduced to swing dancing at Rutgers, and that kind of transformed your life's journey a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, more than a bit. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about, I mean, I'm so fascinated about your dance world,
Yeah.
you do now, and the pictures I'm going to post, and it's not a mainstream pursuit,
No, it's
correct?
not. No, not at all. Not at all.
So
And compared,
how did that come about, Peter? You just happened upon swing dance at Rutgers?
well, I think where it started was the summer right before I went to Rutgers. I was spending a lot of time with this, a woman I dated on and off in high school. The X. I'm sure you've been around long enough to know the difference between NX and BX, right? But we were spending a lot of time that summer right before I went to Rutgers, and we went to Lincoln Jazz Center, and they would have this series called Midsummer Night Swing. Like once a week they would have some swing band either from New York or regional, international, or national, and you'd be outside this beautiful wooden dance floor, and there was a lesson beforehand and performances, and it was a packed dance floor. I mean, it was hundreds of people, and me, the girl and her cousin went, and I didn't know how to dance. Her cousin was a dancer and was trying to teach me how to, like, do a syncopated triple step, and I was just like, but I tried that night. I'm pretty sure I bumped into or threw my partner into a bunch of people. It wasn't great. And then I went to Rutgers, and I went to some kind of like club fair. And funny enough, I didn't even see the swing dance club there. I mean, their information was there, but I think they were already gone. Like, they even did a performance, but I missed it. But for whatever reason, even though I didn't meet anybody from there or see what it had to offer, I just saw it and I was like, I need to go. I couldn't tell you why. I just like that. For all I have from this is an email, but I'm gonna ride that. And I went to the first lesson, and I got sucked in immediately. And I mean, I'd listened to a lot of jazz at that point, but not really swing jazz. I was more of like a Mingus guy, in high school. And I decided I was not only interested in it, but I like needed to be good at it. I remember my first teachers, Julia Burmistrova and Robert Gadula, and I couldn't quite place why their dancing was so moving to me at the time, until I think now what I realize is that it was very authentic. I mean, they weren't. They were great dancers, for their age and time, but not necessarily exceptional. But I was part of the team, and the performance team was run by this other woman, Jessica. I forget her last name. She was older. She'd been in the dance scene like the '90s, early 2000s. And she had done Lindy Hop, but she was also a West Coast swing dancer, which comes from Lindy Hop, but it came around like the 60s, 70s. It's much more linear dance, smaller, and it's danced like pop and R&B and blues music. But I remember her doing, making choreographies for us as Lindy Hoppers. And then I remember at the end of the year, Robert and Julia made one. And that's sort of where I realized, the difference between a Lindy Hop routine and one that is truly authentic and, to the vernacular roots of it. And so, yeah, I got really interested in it. I think within a month I was traveling to Philly.
Wow.
They would have this event called Philly Fish Fry. I think it comes from, we were talking about where swing dance started, like 1930s. A lot of dances before, Savoy got really big, I think happened at like people's apartments, like rent parties, so you'd go, you'd pay $5 and you'd go and dance in someone's apartment, but food was a part of that. And like, I think they'd fry fish. I think that's where that comes from. Um, and it's so much different than, being in like a college, filled with like, maybe 20, 30 dancers who are still figuring it out, and then going to like a packed dance floor, full of people who are just as new as you, but also like people who've been doing this for a long time and are really, really good at it. There's just a much different energy in the room. And that's where I saw my first jam circle. A jam circle being usually happens towards the last song of a set or the night, and it's usually a ripper, 200 plus BPM. And how it is there is a lot of the dancers will form a circle, and then there's only two dancers in the spotlight, maybe 2 to 4 usually. And they'll get 8/8, and that's it. And that's like their solo. And then every time a new couple is supposed to come in, you go hut 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 ho. That's like the call for the phrase is ending. You've had your time. Get off. These other people, need to show off now. And I just remember being outside, like right before it, like having a smoke with this guy. And he came off just very, chill, pedestrian. And I go back in, the jam circle starts, and he just threw down like so hard, and just in a way that I wouldn't have guessed from how reserved he was. And that's a lot of the Lindy Hop community. We really come alive and become different characters, especially as the spotlight is, owned more acutely at us, and so, yeah, bearing witness to that, I got really into, just traveling anytime, our school would let us. I went to Pittsburgh the next month, pit stop Lindy Hop, which is still one of my favorite exchanges to this day. Probably the event I've been to most over the years. And yeah, I did it for a year, and I still wasn't like very good at it. I mean, I put in a lot more time and practice with than a lot of the other people I had started with my first year. And then my sophomore year, I started taking ballet and modern, which, even a lot of there's a lot of professional Lindy Hoppers who have maybe come from other dance backgrounds. Maybe they came from ballet and modern, studio jazz, stuff like that. There's not a whole lot of people in the Lindy Hop community who start with Lindy Hop and then, start taking ballet and modern to,
I figured that.
yeah, to like develop their proprioception. I only know one off the top of my head, Nick Williams. He's like from California, and and he was part of the revival in like the 90s and 2000s. One of the most technically clean, dancers in the scene. But I know around when I started, around like 2013 to 2015, he was apparently taking like ballet classes to supplement himself as a dancer, even years after he'd established himself as a world-class dancer, but yeah, I was taking this ballet and in the semester after this modern class, and I had this professor, Simone Bachle, Simone Kalan. Now she got married, and she would have us keep these dance blogs. Not only talking about our experience on the floor, but off. How does the deliberate movement that you exercise like on our studio floor, doing plies and first position, how does that translate to how you carry yourself outside? Do you think it affects you like when you walk into like a job interview, for instance? And I remember reading, I think his name was David Zurich, and it was about this guy who was like an engineer. He was like an engineer until about like 21, 22. Like that's what he was going to do. He was in STEM. and he saw this dance performance. I forget why. It may have been ballet, it may have been something else. And he just decided, I'm going to do that. I'm going to become a dancer. And so he did. And now, he was a professional dancer. And, that's what I was sort of contending with at the time too. Like I'm in computer science. That's a very safe and lucrative field if I can get through it. But I feel compelled to, do dance, which is not very lucrative and, can go awry at any time. If I get in a car accident, I could still code, not so much as a dancer.
Right.
But, I was dealing with a lot of imposter syndrome about it at the time, like just because I was doing all this other work that, people who were still at my introductory level weren't. I didn't really feel like it made me that much better. Like I was terrible at ballet. Just awful seeing myself in the mirror there. I was like one of the only people who had never done ballet in that class at all. Everybody else was there because they knew they were going to the dance program. But it was just a prerequisite for them. I think there was one other guy who really didn't have any other experience. And actually we were the only two men in the class from what I remember as well. But yeah, I remember doing the report on David Zurich and sort of, explaining my reservations to Simone, about, what am I going to do? Can I do this? Am I good enough? Will I ever be good enough to do this? And I just remember her saying, the world needs more dancers.
I read that. That's a great line.
It is. Yeah. I'm going to get a
Great
tattoo at some
line.
point.
It's really heavy.
Yeah.
Provocative. I read that here and it's a great line. Before we move on, I'm going to go a little bit. I forewarned you. So we're going to go a little bit off topic. It's one of my favorite questions to ask.
Sure.
You don't even have to answer it.
I will.
Or you can come up with a couple different. But here it is, Peter. Excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with. Interesting question.
It's incredible. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to.
No. It's just I just need to
It doesn't have to
deliberate.
be one. If there's a couple, that's fine. There's no rules here.
Yeah. Frankie Manning would
Okay.
definitely be one of them. He actually passed right before I really got into the dance scene. People, again, he was one of the OGs. He was from the 1930s. He threw the first air step, which is an air step is basically when you do some kind of move that your partner gets air, and he did an around the back. So it was sort of this prep into like a swing out, but then the partner went over his right shoulder and then came out over the left. And I think what separates that from like gymnastics is that it has to be on rhythm. Rhythm is probably the most important musical component of Lindy Hop. So it has to be in 8 counts. There needs to be some kind of acute percussiveness to it. But he, after we were talking about this before, Lindy Hop kind of died after World War II, and he became a mailman. He became a postman. He was like a celebrity within the Lindy Hop community. You can see him in a bunch of films as a dancer. He helped to choreograph Keep Punching is one of them, with one of the most famous routines in Lindy Hop, Hell's a Poppin'. He became a mailman, and then the 80s, these Swedish dancers got really interested in Lindy Hop, and they tried to convince him, come back, teach, please. I don't even know how they got a hold of him. At first he was like, no. And then he relented, and he started teaching again in the 80s and 90s, and really started, he helped to give rebirth to the scene. It's sort of hard to explain the significance of that. It would be like if Frank Sinatra just left the scene abruptly, and jazz had kind of died, and then these people really wanted to learn how to play like the Rat Pack again, and Sinatra came back and started teaching, like mentoring people how to do that. It's very hard to explain, but he was called the ambassador of Lindy Hop. in his later years. And a lot, a lot of people got to meet him. People I know got to take classes with him. So it would have been, and I've been in the room with a few other greats from the time, Jean Velaz and Norma Miller, before she passed a couple years ago. But so yeah, I would like to spend a day with Frankie, just picking his brain. Super
Perfect.
friendly, gregarious guy.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Back to some. So you're also a literary critic, and
Yeah.
you've written a couple of interesting essays, which I haven't read. But when we first talked, you talked about Gatsby,
Yeah.
which intrigues me, the Great Gatsby, and you also wrote something about careless drivers.
Yeah, that was the Gatsby essay. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you wanted just to say a couple of words about that.
Sure. Yeah. So it was the final essay I ever uh, wrote in college. I was an English minor, but pretty much any professor I had would have told you I should have been going to grad school. They would read an intro paragraph and they'd be like, you could get into grad school, off this alone. A couple teachers tried to convince me to get something published, do a panel, like when I told you about that 20-page paper I wrote at Rutgers. The professor, Ridi Boulos, was trying to get me to publish it and do a panel on it the following semester, but I was incredibly depressed at the time and didn't have the energy or wherewithal to agree to that. But yeah, the Gatsby essay was my final work. I'd read Gatsby in high school and it never really struck out to me at all. But we read it as part of my capstone course to get my English minor. And I'm not sure where the idea came from, but I got hyper fixated on Nick as a narrator, and I feel like he kind of hides himself in the text a lot. When you think of Gatsby, you think of the Roaring Twenties, hedonism, and Gatsby's secret life and his very volatile relationship with Daisy. Tom being this kind of awful wife beating. Well, not he doesn't beat Daisy, but he beats Myrtle. This misogynist and just this brute. There's all these really really colorful, terrible characters. Everybody's kind of awful in the Great Gatsby. But I got really interested in Nick, and yeah, I started exploring some literary criticism that kind of hinted at his ambiguous sexuality. I think I first started getting intrigued by people talking about the scene with him and Mr. McKee. I don't know if you remember that, but yeah. So what happens is Nick and Tom, they drive out so that Tom can go pick up Myrtle. And then he takes her like into the city to go have this like sort of small gathering between him and some other friends. And at the end of the night, he beats Myrtle. I forget what she says, but he beats her like in front of all these people, right? And I think a lot of people become preoccupied with that. But there's this couple, this married couple, Mr. and Mrs. McKee. And at some point, Nick and Mr. McKee leave the party after Tom beats Myrtle, and they're going down this elevator, and Mr. McKee is like, we should meet sometime, and Nick is like, what do you want to do? And he's like, anywhere, anytime, right? And this is the 20s, right? Like, to say anywhere, anytime, it's almost, I say it's farcical, right? Because usually if two men, if they're agreeing to meet up, it's for like networking or business, right? But Mr. McKee is just like anywhere, anytime, and Mr. McKee, he grabs an elevator shaft and he gets chewed out by the elevator boy. It's a super socially disruptive gesture, but it's like this signal to Nick, I'd like to sleep with you. He's grabbing like a phallic object, like going out of his way to get his point across. And they end up sleeping together, and Nick goes home that night, has this like sort of 20th century walk of shame. He's like slogging, he's like here on a bench in like the Penn Station. And that scene like endlessly fascinated me because so many critics had just sort of glossed over it. But because it's told in this very surreal way. There's no real concrete exposition to it. He's using a lot of ellipses to sort of unground time. he's trying to ground you from like both time and place, and it just feels like he's trying to hide the scene somewhere. He purports to be the most honest man he has ever known, and yet there's something very, I don't want to say insidious about the scene, but he's telling you, but it seems like there's something more to hide. And my thesis was that um, we tend to think of narrators as reliable or unreliable, and then there's a further distinction for me is in that unreliability can be announced or it can be unannounced, right? And I think when we think of unreliable narrators, it's usually as announced. The example I gave was The Telltale Heart from Edgar Allan Poe, right? The narrator is obviously unhinged. We cannot believe a word that he's saying. This guy is insane. He murders, the guy he's serving. He's hearing heartbeats on the walls, right? But it's announced that he's unreliable, right? And but Nick is an unannounced and unreliable narrator. And he's unannounced at least up until the end of the book, where Jordan Baker, his this woman he's courting throughout the novel, kind of calls him out on it. And how it's this affectation that was sort of specific to the modern era, modern with a capital M, of the 20th century, and how we are supposed to sort of contend with these narrators going forward. And I guess, my final point was Nick. Nick is unreliable. He goes unannounced. He tries to pretend to be something he isn't. And to be clear, and I make this clear in the essay, Nick is not a bad person because he's queer, right? That's not the point of it. The point is, he says he's completely honest, and yet he's hiding this from us, right? And so what how are we supposed to contend with that? Like, what else is he hiding, or what other parts of the story may he be manipulating, to further his own agenda, to protect his own ego, right? And, I mean, there's some, sort of sympathy for the fact that, like, it was hard at that time to come out at all, even if you're I think the framing device is like he's, talking to like a psychologist at the end about all of this. But even this honest, sort of setting, he's hiding something. And I talk about his relationship with Jordan Baker, and how part of the reason he's attracted to her is because she also has these masculine features. He's obsessed with cars, and there was the sporty Jordan, and the electric Baker. All right, so like he's already interested in her because of, like, it's connected to this masculine interest of high-end automobiles. And he describes her as cadet-like, that keeps her shoulders like all the way back, and that's connected in a lot of ways to his experience at war. A lot of people forget about it, but Nick is a veteran. He had fought in World War I, and that's what actually prompts him to go east. He lived in the Midwest, and he comes back, and all the color is gone. It's desaturated from the Midwest he had loved all his life, and he's like, I'm going to go learn the bond business. But he absolutely kind of loved being at war, surrounded by men, exclusively by men. And he comes back, and he meets Jordan, who he's reluctant to at first. He Daisy and these other women are trying to, like, set him up, to stop being a bachelor, and he's always trying to push the subject away. But he gets kind of into Jordan because she has some of these masculine features. Similar to Mr. McKee. Mr. McKee is described as pale and feminine in figure. There's a lot of talk in the book about withinness, withoutness. And I feel like both of these, it's something Nick is kind of obsessed with. And I think, part of the reason he's attracted to Mr. McKee and Jordan is they bear these sexual characteristics of that, conform to the standard of withinness and withoutness that he's, ultimately so enthralled with. And in terms of careless drivers, there's a scene around the middle of the book where him and Jordan are on a date, and Jordan is, I believe she is literally driving a car. And Nick is kind of calling her out, saying like, you're careless, you expect others to protect you, but you don't really care about others. Like what would happen, if you met someone just as careless as yourself, and she's like, that's why I like you, because you're not. But he is. That's the point. That's the point of my essay. He is a careless driver. He's not aware of it, or he's not honest about it. But he is careless. He's pretending to be someone he's not, pretending to be that like everybody can and should trust him. I think a lot of people think of him as without agency, that he's just a witness, he's an observer. But he doesn't tell Daisy about Tom's affair. He doesn't tell her like, you should be careful, this guy beats women that he's unpleased with. He sets up the date between Gatsby and Daisy and ignites their affair. He's definitely an actor, not just an observer. And Jordan, towards the end of the book, they're meeting for the last time, and she says, I did meet a careless driver. I have it here. You said a bad driver was only safe until she met another bad driver, right? Well, I met another bad driver, didn't I? I mean, it was careless of me to make such a wrong guess. I thought you're rather an honest, straightforward person. I thought it was your secret pride, and it's damning, to hear that from her of all people, because she never disagrees that she's a careless driver. She knows it, and she's fine with that, and so she's self-aware about it. And she's one of the only other narrators in the book, or at least takes on the role of narrator when she's talking about Gatsby and Daisy's relationship, right? And we take her word for it. We trust her. And so, yeah, and then Nick is upset, but they shake hands and they move on. She's not mad at him. She just recognizes him for what he is. And the title of my essay is Taken for a Ride. Narrators, by nature, not only take us on a ride through the story, but to their own ends, take us for a ride. There's a lot that they don't tell us that they're trying to push us through, manipulate us through, get us to see things from their point of view. But she shakes hands with him, she moves on, and I'd like to think that Fitzgerald would like us to do the same going forward with narrators. Stop holding them to such high expectations of reliability, or dismiss them out of hand because they have this one sort of formidable lie that they engage in Nick's case, not being on the level with his audience about his sexual orientation. Accept the limits of their reliability. Like, again, narrators are not always going to be announced as unreliable. It's not always going to be that clear cut, especially now in the 20th century. In the modern era, it's really, it's important. It was important then. It's important going forward to find a middle ground of what we can and cannot believe. Again, when move on in peace, even when we are aware that on some level, again, narrators do not only take us on a ride, but to their own ends take us for a ride.
Perfect. Okay, winding down the last little segment I wanted just to touch base with you on. So your journey is taking you to Charleston now. And you do work as a butcher.
Yep.
And you also have done some work for Dranaday Summons.
Dranaday, yeah.
Dranaday, I said it right.
Yeah.
As a booking agent. So briefly, just talk about your life right now in Charleston.
Yeah, so I came here in July. I had been living in these, terrible apartments in Brooklyn under, these slumlords. Like I didn't have like a lease agreement. My last apartment, there was a kitchen in there, but I couldn't use it. I had to get my water from the bathroom sink. There was, I had these mice problems that, my landlord refused to take liability for, and I had to pay for myself. It just, pretty terrible situations all around. And my mother and stepdad had moved to Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, in March. And, I sort of decided at the beginning of this year, I'm done with computer science professionally. Like I tried to pursue it again. It didn't work out. And I just decided I'm done. I need to make some kind of transition or career change. And it wasn't until really the end of June that I finally got a job as a contract copywriter. And they did like Facebook ads, for like these entrepreneurs and these like entrepreneurial coaches and stuff like that, life coaches, etc. But I wasn't making a whole lot of money. I was still looking for more serious work, and my mom, knew I wasn't in the best place. And she was like, "Why don't you come down here for a little bit, and then you can look for work in New York, and then when you get a job, you can go back, but at least come out here and you can get sunlight. You can, eat more than one terrible meal a day. You don't have to worry about pests, etc." And the last time we had lived together, there was a lot of dysfunction, and again, I was also seriously depressed at that time. Basically, since March 2020 up until August of this year, I was in a pretty intense depressive episode. Like I have bipolar, but I lean towards depressive episodes over manic ones most of the time. So it was this 2.5-year depressive episode, and she was like, here, take some time to rehabilitate while you're looking for more, steady work. And I came, kind of reluctantly. I didn't want to, have another dysfunctional situation with my mother again. We were both a little bit anxious about that, but she really wanted me to get better, and I wasn't in a place to not accept the help. So I came, and then I spent a month kind of looking for work. I was waiting to hear back from for a job from my friend's company, Yuri. He's like one of my best friends ever. And he works at a digital marketing firm, and, he was entry level and got in, and they did a good job of mentoring him. And I thought, with my technical skills, I have a pretty good shot, but they never got back to me like after a month. And, me and my mother had been talking kind of jokingly about me just staying, but, when I realized there was really nothing for me to go back to in New York, why wouldn't I just want to stay in an area with a better cost of living? And one thing I had noticed was like a lot of the service, retail, fast food workers here got compensated very nicely compared to like the minimum wage and stuff you'll find in New York. It felt like a lot of the smiles you get from like customer service were a lot more genuine. Like they seemed to really enjoy their jobs. Not that like there's anything wrong with like, I'm sure you've gone shopping in New York before, and, a lot of the people don't look super happy to be working in service. Not that they don't do a good job of it, but there's not a whole lot of genuine smiles, and that's fine. New York is a tough place to be. It's overpriced. It's very easy to experience compassion fatigue pretty hard and pretty often. But I thought, even if I have to get some kind of entry level, unskilled, skilled labor job here, it'll be better than if I tried to find that in New York, which is kind of out of character for me, in the sense that, places for me are the people in them. I mean, New York is a character in and of itself, and it was much more of a character to me that gave back as much as I gave to it when I was in high school. But I couldn't even afford to take the metro to see my friends, so like, what was the point of going back if I couldn't see them? Or, even when they wanted to hang out with me and I could, I was just like, I'm so depressed. I don't, you and everybody who's going to be there are very emotionally intelligent and are going to know that like something's wrong. And, this is, like I got invited to my friend's like housewarming party after they moved in with their girlfriend. It was just like, this is your night. but if I go there, people are going to be concerned about me because I'm not going to be able to put my mask on, and I don't want to do that, right? I mean, maybe that's just being way too self-conscious on my part, but nevertheless, I couldn't, and I didn't want to see my friends in New York in the state that I was in, so I decided to stay here. And if there's any, I know LinkedIn works for you. You have a much different relationship with it, especially now that you have all your connections. But I've been talking to this guy who's a bit younger than me, and I'm like, if there's any advice I can give you, it is to, if you're looking for a job, it is to get off of LinkedIn in many ways, because people, I find even today, don't really care who you are until you shake their hand. You know, you need to get in front of somebody. You need to really let them know what they're working with, and how you can get what you want through your body language and how much you might have to offer. And so, I'd been living there for a month, and the person I talked to most since I was here was a guy who he runs this vape / head shop. His name is Eric. I've been like a chronic, pot smoker for a number of years now. Like I had a medical card in New York. And I get here and I'm like, I needed a medical card in New York. Surely it's not illegal here. So I just went to his place, like asking for CBD. I was like, I walk in, I was like, you got CBD? And he's like, yeah, but I also got weed, and just pulls out this huge bag. I was like, there's no way you can just like buy it at this public store here, but you can, I guess, if they have a license. But so, I would go in, once a week or so to get, edibles and like CBD for my mom and stuff like that. And so he was the person I talked to the most in that first month. And I was like, why not look for a job from him? And so I reached out to him, and he was like, we don't hire employees. We had a bad experience with that. It really is a two-man show, but you should check out this networking event in Mount Pleasant. They might be of help to you. And I couldn't find the one he was talking about, but I did start looking for networking events, and I went to one. And I got like 5 to 6 business cards. I emailed all of them, and a number of them, would say, I'll get back to you on Monday, and never did. And I feel like that's sort of a bit of a key difference between New York and a lot of other people in other states. Is New Yorkers are kind, but they are not nice. They don't have the time or energy to be. But if they see a tourist or somebody looking around where they need to go, a flock of people, or somebody at least, will walk out there and be like, where are you going? Here's the train you need to take. Right? They're kind. People down here, not that there aren't kind people here, but I find a lot of people, especially older ones, tend to be nice. They'll say they'll do something for you as a nice gesture, but don't necessarily really follow up with it often. But one guy got back to me. He sold real estate, and he was like, I don't have a job for you. I can't help you really, but you should go check out this other networking event run by this guy, Thomas Heath. He's he's called the branding guy, and he's an entrepreneur. But he's also a playwright, and he's written music, and he's like, you're both creative. I'm sure you can figure something out. And so at this time, I was still thinking I wanted to do copy editing, writing, something along those lines. So I got the one piece of copy that I had made at my contract gig, and I got my college essays, because I didn't really have any other type of portfolio. I went to his networking event, 1 Million Cups, and he knew who I was. The real estate guy had introduced us over email, but really only got like 5-10 minutes to speak at the end of it. He took a look at my writing. He was like, I can tell you're a good writer. Your titles are long, and you definitely use a lot, like too many words, but you're a good writer. And so he's like, what do you want to do? Like, do you want to write? But do you want to write? And I was like, yeah, my college professor said I was good at it, and I think I'm pretty good at it. And he's like, okay, yes, but do you want to write? And he was like, I'm going to do for you what I do for my coaching clients, which is 2 years, no money, no obligations. What would you be doing? And my first answer was, dance, right? What I was doing right before COVID, practicing, teaching, performing, competing within the Lindy Hop. I was working my way at least up to a semi-professional level, I'd like to think. But I said that I know how unstable that is, especially after COVID, where a lot of dance teachers lost their jobs. I mean, there was Zoom classes and stuff like that, but it's not the same. As a dancer, you need to be in the same room as other people moving with them. So I was like, I know, like, I need to get a different job that will let me like do that more safely and comfortably. So I was like, my second answer would be music and venue management. I ran an informal venue in State College, late amusement, Lindy and blues. When I got to State College, my partner Audrey Kreiser had, former partner Audrey Kreiser had started like hosting, three nights a month, have a DJ dance, and then one night a month she would bring in this house band. First made up of just sort of local musicians, and then increasingly made up of jazz musicians from Penn State. And we paid the band pretty much pizza and beer money, which they were happy to take, and then we'd have a donation hat and stuff out. But I got that, and I was like, we should really figure out how to, it's not a lot of money, but we're still paying them out of our own paychecks. Why don't we figure out how to turn the space into something sustainable that will let us pay them not just out of our own pocket. And so we started having dance classes, like teaching our own dance classes. We wanted to get 10 Brown Shoes. That was the name of the house band. It was 5 dudes, and then one day they all came in with brown shoes, and so they were just called 10 Brown Shoes. And I was like, I don't want to, I want to get them into a bigger venue. Penn State had this spring dance workshop. Like they had 2 a year, but the spring one was the one that it was attended most heavily regionally. They would get some kind of professional band from New York or Philly to come, and I was just like, we should get 10 Brown Shoes there, but like I don't want to do that unless I feel like they're really good, and they were good jazz musicians and they could play fairly well, but swing jazz, while not necessarily difficult in the same way a Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, a Mingus piece might be, it is very specific, and playing swing jazz is very different than playing swing jazz for dancers, right? You can really only get away with one bass solo a night. That's all you get. I'm a bassist, but I had to be like, you get one solo, no Sinatra. If I hear Fly Me to the Moon at a legitimate event, and a single time, I'm gonna scream. But we got them there. They were very receptive to feedback, and we got them to a point where we felt very comfortable advocating for them. Got them a contract at the Spring Dance Workshop, and they killed it. They absolutely killed it. I mean, I'd seen a lot of different professional swing bands in that time, and no, they weren't as good as Gordon Webster, Glenn Kreitzer, Jonathan Stout, but give them another 5 years and they could definitely have been touring nationally as a swing jazz band for sure. I had a lot of confidence in that. And then I think Audrey, she was part of a burlesque troupe, and then had this idea to start having our own burlesque nights to help finance our operations. And so we started doing that, and we got some dancers from the local burlesque troupe, but also from Pittsburgh. We would get comedians. We performed once. I did, I think, a solo performance as well of Trickeration by Norma Miller. She was like the hostess, and she would do her own burlesque dances. We technically weren't allowed to sell alcohol because we didn't have a license, but booze felt very appropriate for this kind of event that we'd have every month and a half or so. And so what we did was we got our friend Arup, incredibly smart guy from India, Calcutta. He already had like 2 masters and was getting like a 3rd one here in the States, doing like this intense like lab research. But he was an incredible mixologist. I'm sure he still is. And so what we would do is we'd have him come and we'd tell people, bring this booze, we'll supply like the mixer, and that'll it'll just be included in the cost of the ticket basically. And he made incredible drinks, and it really did add a lot to these nights. We got these this sort of fairly somewhat professional like lighting system, for like our informal stage and stuff like that. Point is, we took the ground floor of our house and turned it into like a 40-person venue that we made enough money from. That following summer, we got like this $1,000 grant from the Philanthropic organization Three Dots. And with that money and the money we had made throughout the year, we were able to break even on our first, regional dance event. That it was just us. It was just me and Audrey. We really didn't have anybody else helping us plan it. And yet we broke even on it, which doesn't sound like a lot, but there are plenty of events in the Lindy Hop community that don't really break even after a couple years. People, will use the money they make from their real jobs to sort of mitigate their losses and stuff, but they'll still end up short. And we broke even on the first try, which was a really big deal. And so, yeah, when I talked to Thomas Heath, I was just like, yeah, I think music and venue management would be really cool. I'd, love to run my own venue one day. And so he's like, great, I know this guy, Charles Carmody. He runs the Charleston Music Hall, and I could put you in touch. But he's had these requirements for me before I can get there. He wanted me to do a research report on Charles Carmody, reminding me, keep it succinct, don't use too many words, and then updating my resume to have a vision statement to tell a story, not just bullet points. And he's giving me really good feedback on that. And yeah, I mean, I mentioned in the bio, like I've been asked the question of what do you want to be when you grow up multiple times. It was one of the last things I talked about with Andrew Tomasello, the guy who did my capstone course, because I'd done a music internship at Relic, or an editorial internship at Relics, which is the second longest running music magazine in the US after Rolling Stone. It started as like a Grateful Dead newsletter in like the 60s, 70s. And now it's, pretty focused on jam bands, but they cover more mainstream stuff like Leon Bridges and Jack White. But I really didn't get anything out of it. I didn't really feel like I got anything out of it. And Thomas Sowell was like, okay, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, I really still didn't have an answer. But, Thomas Heath demanded one, and there's a really big difference between being asked and someone demanding an answer and, demanding you to answer yourself. So I had that experience with Thomas Heath. That next, when I got home, I went on LinkedIn, and instead of typing, editorial or copywriting, I typed in music venue management, and then this position popped up as talent agent for Drenande Summons. I'd never heard of him, but I went on his Spotify. And I was like, this guy sounds great. I'd love to work with him. And the next day, which was also kind of strange and surreal, because right before COVID, I had met this dancer at this event at an event in Pittsburgh, and we connected, very closely, like over that weekend. And then it turns out they had moved to Charleston. Like they had been living in Rochester, like, pursuing their medical degree. And it just turns out they had moved to Charleston, like around the same time I did. And so I saw them again that Thursday night, the first time I'd been dancing, in over like 2.5 years, and I was awful. Like I used to dance 8, 10, 12 hours a day, no problem. Right. Like I could hang. But I hadn't moved in so long. Like by the second dance, I was like literally gasping for breath. And it's in this church. And so like I had to like recuse myself from the dance floor, because I feel like if people saw me, they would have been like, this guy needs 911. I remember just crawling up these stairs to just like go, catching my breath. But it was just crazy, to just see someone you hadn't seen in 2.5 years that you never think you'd really see again, especially in Charleston of all places. Like how do we both get here around the same time from New York? But anyway, I go home from the dance that night, and then Drenande wants to set up an interview with me right before midnight. And I interviewed with him next Tuesday, and Wednesday I got the packet addressing me as Executive Gambino, which left me quite dizzy. I never thought anybody would call me an executive, or I'd be able to consider myself one. But so it was. And I never would have done that if Thomas Heath hadn't really pushed me to do.
It's great.
Again, what I love and what I believe I can or am exceptional at when I want to be. And so, yeah, I'm still working on getting him gigs. I've talked to a number of other professionals in the industry of how we might get there. The most tangible work I've done for him is doing write-ups of his songs, you know, that you have to like pitch to Spotify or Apple Music and stuff like that, which, you know, is essentially musical journalism. And, you know, I took a musical journalism course, you know, at Rutgers, and I did the editorial internship at Relics, but I don't really feel like those had really anything to do with how I approach musical journalism now, or why I am so good at it. Like I get exceptional feedback from both Janande and my friend Theo, who lives in Paris. He was like the only real friend I still keep from Baruch. And they're always like over the moon about, you know, the write-ups I do for them.
Great.
And I think it mostly comes honestly just from high school. Like my friends, you know, a lot of my friends were incredibly musically inclined, and we had sort of very high standards for conversation about music. You had to be specific. You had to really back up your claims. You know, and not that we were stuck up about it. We treated it very casually, but just going through some of the conversations we had, just so in depth, specific, detailed, as if we were being paid to talk about it. And I think that experience, and just, you know, talking with people I'm friends with who are musically inclined in the years since, and the depth of those conversations has sort of prepared me to do this kind of musical journalism more so than any of the classes I took.
So the last quick question,
Yeah.
you doing all this intense, amazing journalistic agent work, and just to kind of balance it out, in about 40 minutes from now, you're going to go to work as a butcher,
Yeah.
and you like it.
I love it. Yeah. And when I you know, when I applied for the job, you know, I think I applied for a couple positions like front of house and stuff like that. But the first one they wanted me to interview for was meat cutting, butchery.
Did you have
And
to did you actually had to be taught how to do that?
yeah, and I'm most of what I do now is doing grinds, like grinding different types of chuck. You know, there's lean, sirloin, round,
Interesting.
chuck, etc. And, you know, being familiar with the different qualities and fat in that meat, and being able to talk to customers about it. Doing a lot of labeling, cleaning is a huge part of the job. Like they, you know, part of the reason they really wanted me was because they really needed closers. And, you know, I'm not somebody who likes to wake up early, so I put my hours between like 12, my availability between like 12 to 10. And most days I do work from, you know, 2 to 10, 2 to 11, stuff like that, because they really needed, you know, because a lot of the other, it's a 6-man kitchen, including me. You know, a lot of the other people, they have, you know, families and kids and stuff like that, and they want to be able to go home and spend time with them. So they really needed someone who was willing to close. And I was terrible at it at first. You know, it's the highest entry level or highest paid entry level department for a reason, you know, compared to the rest of the store. Not that other employees don't do very valuable, difficult work, but it's backbreaking. You know, you're on your feet 8 hours a day. You're lifting, pulling, pushing, bending. You have to learn how to disassemble, clean, and reassemble these machines with all these different parts. You know, and there's a lot of health safety regulations to comply with. It needs to be a good cleaning. Getting all the meat off the floor at the end of the night. It's a lot. And again, I hadn't moved for like 2.5 years. And so that first week I was miserable. I liked the work, but I was destroyed at the end of the day, which was caused quite a bit of tension between me and my mother. And, you know, one day, sort of after a fight about it, I was like, I'm going to work, and she starts trying to follow me out the door, and I'm like, no, I'm walking. And that's a 40-minute walk in South Carolina heat, right? And I was an idiot, and I went in my actual work clothes, like something like some shirt like this, and you know, these, you know, long stuffy pants, and I just burned through the shirt. Like I was drenched by the time I got to work. But I kept walking. I walked home that night. and I just kept walking to and from work. And about within a week, 2 weeks, I finally started being able to do the physical, manage the physical requirements of the job. I think what made it sort of easy for me, even though I hadn't done butchering work before, is a lot of the work is, intellectual in terms of figuring out how much meat you need to grind and doing the machines. It's a lot of emotional labor. You're dealing with customers, all day, right? And you need to be friendly. You need to manage their needs and wants. It's, interpersonal work. And that's, what my mother and my aunt, like I grew up in a house full of women, that's what they prepared me and my cousin for, like all our lives. Like that's what they nurtured. They told us we could do anything we wanted, and they never pressured us into anything. But they almost went broke buying books for us. And so they nurtured us to do creative, intellectual, emotional, labor-based work, not the physical one. So I struggled with that, and my mother didn't quite get that the first week. But after a week or two, I got it. I remember actually it was a week right after I had started, and I'd have to go home early one time that first week because I was like, my hands were like shaking and tingling from like the shock of the physical labor, right? And but I remember after that first week, I ended up staying like a 9 or 10 hour shift because we needed to work the truck. And that it is a lot of heavy lifting at the end of the day. And I remember he was showing me how to work the pallet lift. And my manager, Vernon Brown, we're very, very good friends now, but he has a lot of professional decorum, but he would sort of let his personality slip through sometimes, and he engaged in what I call sort of quiet absurdism, right? So he was showing me how to work the pallet lift, and when you're coming down off the truck, there's like this bump on the ramp, right? And he's like, you got to go fast or you're going to get stuck, which I messed up the second time. I went too slow. I did get stuck, but the first time I went fast and I got, basically what happened was I didn't get crushed, but by the time I got it to stop, like my back was against like these other boxes. Like it was pretty close to like pushing me in. And I look at Vernon and I'm like, where's the brake on this thing? And he just, turns his head to me. He's like, you are the brake, but we got through that shift, and that first week I'd barely been able to hold a conversation after I got out, but we got out and he was like, yeah, I didn't think you'd get through a shift like this last week ever, but I did, and I've only gotten better at it since. Like I was wearing this lower back brace my first week, and then I started wearing a full body back brace, just to keep my posture accountable and to help me manage the physical workload. But I don't wear it at all now. I keep it at the store, but I never wear it at all now. I don't need it.
So we're gonna kind of end this interview.
Sure.
There's a whole, I took notes, I wrote some stuff down. So I'm officially, formally inviting you at some point to come back and chat about dancing and being a booking agent. So
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for your time,
Thank you.
for your passion, for your descriptiveness, if that's a word.
Sure. You're
So
a
this has
journalist.
been
It's my
really
job.
interesting for me, Peter, and I know it'll be interesting for people to watch because you're really multifaceted. So I thank you so much. We're gonna kind of break off the recording. Don't leave.
No, I
We'll
got
do
you.
a
Yeah.
quick wrap. And I'm really glad that the universe of connectivity and on LinkedIn brought us together. And I only wish you good things, Peter.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank you.
it's incredible being here. Thank you for having
Thank you.
me,
Thank
and
you.
all
Thank
the
you.
other people you've had on who wouldn't
Yes,
necessarily have
you're
an
number
avenue for
one. You're
this.
number 186. You're my 186th interview. That's substantive.
Yeah, within 2 years, right? You started this 2 years
2
ago.
years. 2 years.
Yeah.
86. So I've been kind of busy. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
To be continued.
Yes, looking forward
Thank
to
you.
it.